There are 4 different shapes that we're going to cover in this video. So we've got a rectangle on the left, a square, a circle, and an ellipse. So to create a rectangle, we use the rect element, so R-E-C-T, and then we put some stuff in there, some attributes and stuff. We briefly mentioned attributes in the Hello World video where we changed the Y coordinate of the text. If the rect element is named after the rectangle, then you might have a prediction on what the square element is, but you would be wrong. A square is still a rectangle. We still use the rect elements. We just make the width and the height the same, because all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares and basic geometry stuff, right? A circle is created by using the circle element, so that's the full word. We didn't shorten it like with the rectangle, so it's not circ. And once again, you put stuff in there to decide the width and the height. Based on what happened with the rectangle and the square element, you might have a prediction about the ellipse element, but it's probably wrong. There actually is an ellipse element. You don't just take a circle and make the width and the height disproportionate. There's actually a separate element for it. I don't know why they weren't consistent across these 4. Like, if you're not going to make a square element, then why'd you make an ellipse element? If you made an ellipse element, then why didn't you make a square element? But that's what they decided to do. So the next question is, what stuff goes in these? For the rectangle, it's width and height. You can set the Rx and Ry, and you can also set the fill and the stroke. So let's try it out. So, if we want to draw a rectangle, we open the tag, RECT, and we have to close it. So let's try giving it some properties. So let's set the width to maybe 100 and the height to 100. There we go. Now the default color is black. We can change that too. We change that with the fill. So maybe I want it to be green. And if I refresh this, now it's green. I can add a stroke around it in addition to the fill. So let's make this maybe orange. And if we refresh this, now we have an orange stroke. It's a little hard to see though, it's very thin. What if we want it to be thicker? We can say stroke hyphen width equals, let's say 10. Now we have a stroke width of 10. Now you might be wondering, like, what is going on up here? Why is it so much thinner? So the center of the stroke is the actual edge of the rectangle. So part of the stroke goes this way and part of the stroke goes that way of the edge. So this part up here is the edge of the rectangle, and part is being cut off by the size of the SVG element itself. If we add an X and a Y in here, so X equals 25 and Y equals 25, we can change where the starting point of this rectangle is. And if we reload it, there we go. So now the starting point of the rectangle is here-ish, and it draws it downward. The stroke goes around it, and we can actually see all of it now, and it's not cut off. Now there were 2 more attributes that I showed before that I haven't shown here yet. So that's Rx and Ry. Let's just use Rx first to show you what it is. So if we do maybe 15 and we save it and we reload, that rounds the edges. So the radius of the corners is set to 15. So what does Y do? What does Ry do? Let's make that a drastically different number. Let's say like 40. And if we save it and refresh, Command R. So if you have just Rx, it will change the rounding radius of the corner on both the X-axis and the Y-axis. If you specify, you can have them differ. So now on the Y-axis, it extends quite a bit more before it goes straight. And if we want to increase it even more, like 50, then it should actually go all the way to the center point since the height is 100. There we go. So those are all of the attributes for the rectangle element that I want to cover right now. Notice, since we made the height and the width the same, we are actually drawing a square this whole time and not actually a rectangle. I'm not going to cover them separately because they're the same elements. So now let's talk about the circle. So to make a circle, we actually type circle, and it's closed the same way as the rectangle element, so with a slash at the end. With this, we don't set x and y, we set cx and cy. For right now, I'm just going to define them as 0, and I'll show you why. R was another attribute that I mentioned, and that's the radius. So if we say 100, we can save it, and let's refresh this. So the starting point of the circle is not the top left like it was with the rectangle, it's actually the center of the circle. So that cx is the center x, and the cy is the center y, and then the r is the radius. So how far out does it draw it? So since the radius is 100, we obviously need this to be at least 100 away to see the whole circle. There we go. Although we still can't see the whole circle because the bottom of our SVG element isn't as big as the circle is. That's okay, we can talk about how to make the SVG element bigger in the future, and we will. You can also add in the fill, just like we did with the rectangle element, and you can add in a stroke and a stroke width as well. And the last one is the ellipse. The ellipse is rather similar to the circle, since it's basically just a stretched circle. We still use cx and cy. Instead of r, we use rx, and we use ry. So this could be like 30 or something. And we can save it, and we can refresh this, and there you go. Now you have an ellipse. So those are the basic shapes. You can use these, you can combine them together to make more sophisticated objects. And we'll show that in an upcoming video.